Hello there, my name is Richard from Silent Peak and a very warm welcome to this ON1 Photo Raw 2026 tutorial where we will take an image that looks like this and make it something that looks like this. Now this is my workflow for 90% of my images. While the specifics may vary, the overall order of my edit is roughly the same almost all the time. However, there are many different ways to edit a photo. This isn't the only way, but I recommend that you give it a go. So this particular tutorial is running ON1 Photo Raw 2026. If you would like to follow along beat for beat, you can, and there is a link to a free ON1 Photo Raw trial in the description below. Furthermore, you can download this exact photo that I'm editing, and if you wish to do that, do check the description below for the download link. If you like this kind of content, do consider subscribing to the channel, and if there are any other tutorials you would like me to make, leave a message in the comments below. So here we are in ON1 Photo Raw's catalog view. Now we're going to select our image and then we're going to click on the edit option. But an easier way to do all of that is to use your keyboard. So for example, to return to our grid view, we can hit the G key, and then to go back into the develop mode, we can hit the D key. So G key, D key, much easier. Now, the first step to editing your photos in ON1 Photo Raw is what I like to call setting the canvas. So we begin by cropping our image, and that way we're not going to waste time editing parts of our image that we're only going to crop away later. So overall, this composition isn't too bad, but we're going to use the level option to sort of correct this tilt. So we just drag the line to represent what straight should be. And then we use the anchor points here just to tighten things up a little bit. Our focus, of course, is the tree and how it stands out against the background. And once you're happy with your composition, we're going to click on this blue tick up here. Now, the second part of setting up our canvas is optical corrections. Now, while in the Develop tab, we're going to go to Lens Correction, and we're going to hit this blue circle here. And if you're really lucky, ON1 Photo Raw will automatically have looked at your photo's metadata, determined what lens it was, and then assigned the appropriate profile to correct it. If none of that has happened for you, then don't worry, we can do it manually. So we just go to the make, so say Nikon, and then we can go to our lens, say 26mm f2.8. And then if we click OK here, it will forever assign this profile with this lens type in your metadata. So this is a one-off task and it's well worth doing. But for now, I'm going to hit cancel. I'm going to click auto. And there it does. It automatically assigns this profile to this lens type as it is presented in my camera's metadata. And you can see here it's quite a radical improvement if we disable and re-enable. So it's well worth the trouble. And that concludes step one. So step two is quite a simple one. It's just white balance. So under the Develop tab still, we're going to go to Tone and Color. We're going to scroll down sort of to the bottom-ish. Color, white balance, and we're going to use this dropper here. And we're going to sample part of the image that's of a neutral color. So quite typically sort of a white. So in my case, I'm going to click on the clouds, and that's going to sort of reorder the image's sort of color palette based on this being the neutral selection. If we're to get this wrong, so for example, if I use my dropper icon and clicked on a green option, that's going to give us some pretty wacky results. If you do this by mistake, just simply rinse and repeat, back to the dropper, and then click on your neutral tone. But that concludes step two, white balance. So step two, exposure and contrast. Now, the basic way of doing this is within the Develop tab and the exposure option. And as we sort of pull the exposure to the left, our image will get darker. And as we pull to the right, the image will get brighter. Likewise, our histogram will pull to the left as the image gets darker, and then right as the image gets brighter. Now, one of the objectives here is to make sure that we don't clip the image. So visually speaking, we can see that we're losing all the detail in the clouds as we sort of push to the white. And that is illustrated on our histogram. We've got this little triangle here, and that will light up red as we start to clip the image. However, using this option does have its problems. So as we sort of pull the exposure down or up, the colors are actually rebalancing as well. Basically, they're saturating and desaturating, and that's going to influence how we use exposure and certainly influence how we apply contrast. So we want to rid ourselves of that problem. And to do that, we're going to shift over to the Effects tab. So we're going to add our very first effects layer. So we're going to go to Add Filter, and we're going to have a look through our various options and find black and white. Now you can add favorites to any of your filters. Well, at least you can in Photo Raw 2026 or newer. And we're going to do that by simply just clicking the heart icon next to them. And then whenever we hit the heart icon here, it will reduce the list to our favorite options. And I recommend that you do this through your tutorial if indeed you are on 2026 or later. So for this moment, we're going to click on black and white. Now we can basically assess the image in terms of exposure and contrast only, without any influence from the color. So having established black and white, we're going to go back to Add Filter, and we're going to go to Tone Enhancer. So Tone Enhancer gives us the very same exposure controls we had before. And again, we're just going to sort of adjust it until our image is kind of neither too dark or too light. And again, being careful not to clip the image. So having set exposure, the next job is to do contrast. Now again, the sort of basic way we can do it is to pull this slider from left to right. However, it isn't a particularly nuanced approach. So I would recommend that you go back to Add Filter and then go to Curves. Now, if you've never worked with tone curves before, the easiest way to use them is if we take our mouse over to our curve, we're going to click right in the middle, then we're going to click in the top middle, and then in the bottom middle. And now we have individual controls over the highlights, the mid-tones, and the shadows. And now we can sort of craft a contrast that fits sort of our requirements. So in this case, I'm going to kind of go for quite a stark look, almost sort of the infrared style. So I don't want to spend too long on this, guys, because that's going to get really boring. So please forgive any ugliness. And what I want to do is I want to sort of add a little bit of darkness, but I don't want to crunch sort of every sort of dark shade of grey to black. But overall, that's looking pretty good. And that concludes step 3, exposure and contrast. So now on to color. So step 4, color. The first thing we want to do is remove our black and white filter. To cancel any, or at least disable any effects layer that we add on, we can just click the blue option here, and that will disable the effects layer. And as you can see, all that pulling contrast and exposure has severely altered our color palette. It's still roughly the same colors as before, but everything has now become more saturated. And now it is time to fix that. Now, if we click on Add Filter, we've got various different color options to play with. And it's well worth experimenting. But for this particular photo, I'm going to go a little bit creative, and we're going to go to Color Replace. So we're going to begin by using this dropper tool, and I'm going to click on something that's green because I want to adjust the green colors. I'm then going to saturate to 100%, and as we can see, everything has sort of turned this red color. Now, I don't want to turn everything red, but this is useful because it illustrates what's selected. I'm then going to use the range option, And I'm going to dial it up until everything that I want selected is selected. Now I'm not getting this green here. It's out of range, so I'm going to try and find a green that's kind of more in the middle. So that's looking pretty good. So I can see the leaves and the grass, they're all selected, but the tree, the sky is not. So having optimized my selection, it's time to sort of dial in the color shift. In this case, I'm going for an autumn look. So I want to remove the sort of evergreen and change it into sort of a nice autumnal, is that how you say that? Okay, well, let's just say autumn look. So we find the right hue. And then we can pull our saturation back to a more reasonable level. And there we go. Now it's always a good idea to see where you've come from. So if we take our mouse here, we can click on the eye option. So there's before, and that's where we are now. But an easier way to do that is if you look at your keyboard, see where the enter key is, and right above that enter key, you've got a backslash. You hold that down, does exactly the same thing. So this photo, we've got two sort of primary colors. We've got the green grass, which we've now changed, and we've also got the blue sky. So I'm going to go to add filter. I'm going to go to the color editor. I'm going to use the sample option, select the blue. And this time I'm not going to replace the blue, I'm just going to strip it of its saturation. Again, leaning into that sort of bleak, wintry autumn look. And that concludes our color edit. So this is where we began, and this is where we're at now. So step 5 is local adjustments and masking. For this, we're going to click on the local option and we're going to click add adjustment, and this will just give us the traditional exposure, contrast and highlights and so on. We now also have this option here. We've got the sort of headline mask option. So we've got automatic subject masking, background masking, sky masking, lumen masking, which is to say we can mask certain areas of the photos based on how bright or dark they are. Depth masking, basically on the perceived distance from the camera based on focus. If we click on the plus here and add, we have those very same masks, but we also have a few others, including gradient. Now, what I want to do is make the sky a little bit more dramatic. So what I'm doing is simulating an ND grad. Now, to make things a little bit easier, we want to sort of see what the mask is masking. And to do that, we can click on this option here, and that will give us our overlay. Now, that's not turning our photo red. It is purely for illustrative purposes only. And we can just get rid of it just as quickly by clicking on it again. Alternatively, if you hold the control option and M, it will do exactly the same thing. So with the overlay present, I can see very clearly that our gradient mask is the wrong way around. So I'm going to grab this little circle. I'm going to rotate it round. And then I'm going to just sort of adjust it so I get as much of the photo affected as I want, which is to say, not an awful lot. And with that mask in place, I'm going to remove the overlay. And then I'm going to adjust the exposure, basically pulling it down so the masked area of the photo begins to look darker than the non-masked area of the photo. And again, if we hit our slash button or preview button, we can see how far we've come. Now you can add as many masks as you like. We're not just limited to one. So all we do is we click add adjustment. That adds a brand new layer. We then select the mask we want, which in this case is going to be a second gradient. And this time I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but to the ground. So again, I'm going to enable my overlay just for the sake of making what I'm doing a little bit more obvious. I'm going to try it about there. And what I'm going to do is sort of simulate some sort of lighting. So you can see here I can brighten up the ground, and then I can sort of darken it again. I'm going to kind of just darken it a little bit. Actually, it looks really good bright, doesn't it? You can also adjust the color, by the way. We're not just limited to exposure. But in this case, this is all we're going to do. And that concludes our step 5, local adjustments. And again, let's look at where we began and where we're at now. So step 6 is stylize, and for that we're going to return back to the effects tab. Now, you may not choose to stylize your image at all, particularly if you're just going for a more natural look, but given that this is a tutorial, I wanted to show you a few of my favorite filters. So again, back on the effects tab, we're going to click on add filter, and we're going to begin with a simple vignette. Now what I like to do is we can go either way, for a light fall off or a dark fall off. I'm going to go for a dark. I'm going to set it to max. Setting it to max may look ugly, but it does prove a useful visual illustration for when we're sort of adjusting the size and feathering and roundness of our vignette. So once you've got all of those properties correct, we can then restore the brightness to a more sensible degree. And remember, if you want to disable your vignette, we can just click on the blue dot and disable and re-enable our effects layer. The next filter I'm going to add, I'm going to go for a little bit of sun flare. Now, I am guilty of using this one far too much, but I just really like it. So here we've got a sun flare. We've got various different types. So for example, we could have a bokeh if we wanted. But in this case, I am going to stick with sun flare, and I'm going to go for the second variant. So we've got different variants of sun flare you can try. But I'm going to go for sun flare 2. I'm going to put it to the right hand side of the screen. For some reason, we can even put it at the bottom if we like. I'm going to dial the amount down. It's a bit much. I'm going to pull the brightness in, mess around with the saturation. How sort of golden do we want things to be? Boost the sunshine. And again, let's have a look. So click on the blue dot, we can see the image before the sun flare, and then the image afterwards. So we are on to the final step, step 7. Nice and easy. We're going to go back to the develop tab. We're going to scroll down, noise and sharpening. We're going to zoom into our image 100%. And then we're just going to add our sharpening. So put the threshold up to somewhere between 2, 3 and 4, depending on your image. And then dial the amount up until you get something that starts to look sharp, but not so sharp that it starts to sort of look pixelated. Pixelated isn't a good look. Now, your sharpening levels will vary depending on what you want to do with your image. If you're wanting to print, you can actually over sharpen a little bit. But if you're keeping it on a screen, social media, for example, you can dial it down a little bit. But I would say that looks sharp enough. So let's go back to our photo. And that concludes our edit. So this is our photo as edited. And this is where we began. So I will be honest, a very average photo, which has been turned into something that would look pretty good on the wall, on a canvas, in the kitchen or in the bathroom. But yeah, finished. So I do hope that tutorial was useful. If you would like me to cover any other topics in ON1 Photo Raw, please leave a comment below. If you like this content, do like, subscribe, even leave a super thanks if you like. Remember, you can try this version of ON1 Photo Raw free via the link in the description below. And if you are considering buying ON1 Photo Raw, do drop by the Silent Peak Photo store first. Here you will find various discounts and promo codes. Thanks for dropping by. My name's Richard from Silent Peak. Have a great day. Bye-bye.